Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Hard to Be Human. I am your host, Chad Rogers, and in today's episode, we are going to be having our first guest come on. And my first guest is my wife, Melissa Rogers. Very excited to do this interview and for her to be able to share some of her story with you today. And this episode is called Hard to Be Whole. And if you remember in a past episode, I was talking to you about worldviews and how worldviews have all these different pieces, like pieces of a puzzle. And sometimes in a person's worldview, there are pieces that are either missing or maybe they get destroyed because of some kind of tragedy. Sometimes pieces are added, like when you get married, if you have kids, something like that. But the puzzle always has to shift and it has to change when these new pieces are added or when pieces are taken away or those pieces change in some way. And so the puzzle has to change. And so kind of keeping that in mind as we're listening to her story today, just listening to some of the struggles that she's been through, how they've made her stronger, but also how she's had to change that piece of the puzzle. Like she's had to change, her worldview has had to change because of the different things that she's gone through as well. Um, Now, in just a moment, we're going to talk a little bit about like her father and her relationship with her father, but just a couple of things real fast for some context there before we get into more of that story. Chuck was her father. He died in 2014 of cancer. He was a Vietnam veteran, and he was also former law enforcement as well. And so, but as Melissa and I were talking some about him, one of the terms that we used to describe him, that she used to describe him, was authoritarian. And so, Melissa, what do you mean when you say that your father was an authoritarian?
Well, one of the first things that comes to mind is um, just, as a kid and then even, as a teenager, um, you know, if you had to ask him a question, there was never just a no, right? So I was always afraid or very tentative to ask him a question where I thought that the answer might had any chance of being no, because it wasn't just no. It was a big production, um, or or there was yelling, or there's lots of yelling. It wasn't just no. I remember one time I was probably in junior high, and I'd asked if I could go to a concert with a friend of mine that was the same age and her older sister, who was probably 4 years older than us, was probably a senior in high school or something like that. And this was like a Beach Boys concert. So we're not talking about, this was like their, reunion tour or something. So we're not talking about, going to see, a heavy metal band or Ozzy or anything like that. It was the Beach Boys, right? And it was at our fairgrounds here in Fort Smith, Arkansas, right? So it's not like, like it was a big thing, right? Well, instead of just saying, no, I really don't feel that you would be safe there, he stood up from the couch and because I was just standing in the living room, picked me up and body slammed me on the couch to prove his point that I would not be able to take on, an adult male who tried to, steal me or hurt me or whatever. But it was things like that. Pulled into a gas station one time when I was learning how to drive. I don't know what the hell I did wrong, but he did not like the way I pulled into next to the pump. It was too close to the pump or whatever, and he was so bent out of shape that I did that. And one of the first times that I'd ever stood up to him, I finally said, "You know what? I didn't freaking do it on purpose, I didn't do it to make you mad, you know. I'm sorry." But anyway, so that's the sort of thing. He was just overbearing. He was very perfectionistic. Something else, like when I tried sports, if I wasn't good at it, it was like I was an embarrassment, and that would make him very angry. One day I struck out, all the times I got up to bat at a softball game, there were no words spoken on the way home. But when I got home, he told me to grab my ball and my bat and get my ass outside. And so I swung and swung and swung and swung and swung, and then I ran laps around the backyard because I had um, struck out and embarrassed him in front of all of the other softball parents. So that's kind of what I mean when I say authoritarian.
Right. Yeah. Now, also, though, kind of going back before that, because those are kind of your teenage or earlier years there. So, kind of going back in his history, you were telling me, or I remember you telling me that he was abused when he was a child, and it was his mother that was abusive for him.
Hmm.
So, can you tell us
Yeah.
anything about that relationship that you remember?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't, I really don't remember anything about, I mean, I know I met his mother. I know I met his father, but from what I gather and know, very dysfunctional. Like I said, I found out much later that he was, he was sexually abused by his mother. And a lot of times we know that abusers become abusers. I mean, the abused become abusers. Um, and that was the case for me when I was young, before I was a teenager. I really don't remember how old I was or really have any concept of how long it went on. It did stop. And I remember the day that it did. I still just don't remember how old I was, but I was sexually abused by my father when I was young. So all of these things have kind of made me, you know, I grew up trying to be a people pleaser. I just, my whole goal in life was not to rock the boat, to make everybody else happy, and I kind of believed that it was, my responsibility for everybody to be so.
Right. For those of you who know Melissa, especially if you know her from the gym, that might be surprising to you to learn that when she was younger, she was a people pleaser because now she really just doesn't have a problem kind of telling people what she thinks and being on her own. She's really grown a lot. Like one of the things I say a lot in a podcast or even on in my classroom, struggles make you stronger. And that's very much the case here. And so she had to change and grow and become stronger, and she did through these types of experiences as well. So, I mean, after like your teenage years, and like I say, you stood up to him eventually, you did tell your mother about some of the abuse, and then there was a time of separation. Is that right?
Yeah. Something happened when I was in high school. Um, the story was, I mean, we were at an out of town football game. It was like the state championship when I was, I think, I think I was like a sophomore or something like that. But me and a couple of my girlfriends we were all staying in a hotel, and a couple of my girlfriends were staying in a room, and my parents were staying in a room next to us. And we ran down the hallway at some point, I guess making too much noise. Dad was not happy. He came banging on our door and actually hit me upside the head with the palm of his hand. And I'd had enough at that point. Um, so the next day after we got home, I remember I told my mom kind of everything about the abuse when I was young because I had never told anybody. Just, let it go on. So that was how that came about. So sorry, I lost what your actual question was.
Well, just that you told your mother, and so you explained how you told your mother.
Yeah, but you had
Yeah.
a question that I was trying to answer, but I
Just
started
how,
with.
right, just how it came about um that you told her. That was
Oh,
what I wanted
okay.
you to explain. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
you had told her, and then there was a time of separation there.
Oh, yeah. And that actually was much later. After, so if we want just to kind of give some of the backstory, I did develop an eating disorder, and that happened when I was in college. I mean, a lot of that is just a control thing because again, life feels out of control. You try to control everything you can. I can control how much food I put in my mouth. I can control how much I weigh, all of those things. All of these other things felt out of my control because I was really living my life for everybody else. Again, people pleasing, trying to make sure that it didn't rock any boats. And so I developed an eating disorder. It started, well, the anorexia probably started um, in middle school, junior high. Okay, so I kind of had anorexia all through high school. When I went to college, it is when it morphed into bulimia. So just more the same. Then I also met and start well, not met because I knew him from before, but started dating the man who became my first husband. Um, and he eventually became abusive as well. He became addicted to drugs. Um, and then there was lots of I eventually went to counseling. Okay, so my first husband, his name is Jay. He knew about the abuse from my father, all of those things. So any trouble that we had in our marriage generally was kind of put on me and how messed up I was because of all that, which was true, right? I had never really dealt with any of that. So I had a lot of baggage. I had the eating disorders and all that. But so that led to some counseling, um, which, started me down the road of realizing that I was not in a healthy relationship. Um, but it took me a very long time to figure that out. So about the age of, oh, I don't know, probably in my, very late 20s is when I first started seeing a counselor. And at that point, brought up a lot of the stuff we were talking about, all these things, it started to, it was initially counseling, supposed to be couples counseling or whatever, but then counselor was like, I think I just need to, I just want to talk with you. But one of the things that was brought up was, okay, you have children now, or at least I had one at that point. You have to protect your child from a possible abuser in my father, right? And I also kind of had an unhealthy relationship with my mother, more like I was too attached to her in some way. Um, and she felt like I needed to separate myself from them until I could really process everything that had happened. Now, I confronted them about it. It's not like I just cut them off. They actually came to a counseling session with me, and I was like, I'm going to have to. And it was so painful. It was so hard. The hardest thing I ever had to do. And then I continued to have to deal with issues with Jay by myself. Right. So I didn't really have anybody there. So there was a period of, I'm going to say a couple years where I didn't have any contact with either of my parents at all.
Okay. Right. Now, you've mentioned Jay a couple times and you said he was addicted to drugs. So just backing up because I asked how, about the separation, that period of time,
Mhm.
and that makes sense. But now let's back up for just a second and explain how, like his drug addiction, how that started.
Um, Now I know he experimented with some drugs in high school, but when it became an obsession that I was aware of, he had a dirt bike accident, went over the top, wasn't wearing a helmet, and had a pretty significant head injury. Some of the recovery from that caused him to be very tired. I mean, just, lethargic and not have any energy. He also was working a shift that was 3 to 11 at a trucking company. I mean, he was like a dispatcher. But so during that time, in order to keep going immediately after, he started taking something, and I'm not sure what it was, but it eventually led to meth. And so, and that's where he was getting his energy. Then it got to where he wasn't coming home at 11. It would be 2 or 3. Well, where did you go? All of those things. And one of the first times I remember him putting his hands on me, um, he always laid his wedding ring, kind of in the same spot on the vanity. in the bathroom when he went to bed. And when I got up that morning, because I was getting up to go to work, I think, and but he was still sleeping because he had just gotten home not that long ago. But I noticed that his wedding ring wasn't there, and I was just like, because he had been, it was very late getting home, whatever. I was already, worried about it. Well, I decided to go snooping in his truck. Well, I found his wedding ring, and it was stuck in a toilet paper roll in the middle, and had like toilet paper crammed in there, and there was also like a pipe in there. And I decided the smart thing to do was just I wasn't going to wake him up, but I laid it on the vanity in the bathroom, his ring in the pipe. And not the best choice because it really set him off. And and he actually shoved me down that day. And that was the first time I remember um, him putting hands on me.
But there were other times. I mean, it's not like that was a
Yes,
one-off.
right.
Um, and then from there, you've talked some about attempts to leave, attempts to just get away from her, or times that you did. You just had to
Mhm.
leave the house and
Yeah.
sometimes take the kids.
Yeah.
Um,
The first time I left, he when he with the drug addiction, he would be high for so long, and then he would have to come down, and he would be trying to sleep, and so then he would start drinking. Um, and he did that one night, and um, I'm not sure if we got into an argument or whatever about how drunk he was because he wasn't making any sense, and he was, just being ugly. And he eventually is like, because our son at that point was about 3, and he was like, I'm really just, you're going to call the cops. And so I'm just gonna have to kill you, aren't I? You and Parker. I'm just gonna have to kill you both because you're just gonna just destroy my life. Of course, and I was like, no, whatever. So we talked about that for a while. He eventually passed out. And at that point, I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I just um, laid there and listened and thought. I'm like, I have to be ready to leave. This is not acceptable. Um, and so the next morning, I went to work. I took Parker to his preschool first, went to work, and I don't remember what happened, but at some point, I don't know whether he sent me a message or tried to call me or something, but I was like, I have to get Parker, and I have to leave town, and I have to leave town now. I called the cops. I tried to get an order of protection, but that requires them to be served. And I was like, that's too scary. I can't, if he knows I'm doing this, there's no way he's going to let me leave. So a friend of mine, I couldn't use in my ATM cards or anything like that because he would be able to see the transactions and things like that. So a friend of mine at work went to the ATM and gave me $300 to go, this is gas to get home. I went to the preschool and got um, our son and drove home to my parents' house. And this must have been I think this was before um, I quit having contact with my parents. This was a time before that, but or maybe after. I don't know. There were so many times, but but I remember my dad called the highway patrol and had them spot me on the way home because I told him, I'm like, I'm hauling ass. Like, because if he figures out what I'm doing, he's gonna chase me.
yeah,
And so I'm gonna be driving. So you just tell him that I'm gonna be driving fast, and just to let me drive fast.
right.
So and that's what we did. And got home and went to Walmart and bought some clothes because we didn't have anything. So that was the first time. And I left, I moved out twice. I moved out twice before the actual end. So two other times after that, I moved out.
Right. Now,
But
at that time, you guys were living in Memphis. That's why you were
right,
driving
yes.
across state. But then eventually, you had a job change and came back from Memphis back to Fort
Right.
Smith. And there were several incidents in Memphis. There were several incidents in Fort Smith as well. And you
Mhm.
mentioned kind of the final. So, what was the final incident?
So, and again, I don't remember what started this whole mess, but I had already decided that we needed to leave again. I think I had moved out once, we had reconciled, I moved back home, with the kids. But this time, um, I knew I had to leave. The drug addiction was getting worse. Everything was getting worse. And so I had been planning for, I think about a month. I was in behind his back, doing it all in secret, opening new bank accounts, all these things. And it was awful. I mean, it was so stressful. I had friends at work helping me go look at places to live and things like that. Well, um, I so we were at home the night before I was supposed to move out. And I don't remember what happened that triggered the whole thing. But um, I was trying to leave with Carly. Parker was at his martial arts class. I had Carly there. She was 5. Um, and I was trying to leave because he was so mad because but then when I tried to leave, he wouldn't let me. Right. So he took the keys from me so I couldn't get in the car. And then he called my parents and told them to come get me. And he kicked me out of the house. So I'm standing at the road in the front of our house with Carly, who's crying. And he opened the front door and fired a 45 in the air and said, "You better not ever fucking come back." And Carly's screaming in my ear, "Somebody's going to die. Somebody's going to die." And I'm like, "No, we're going to be fine." And so I stood there and waited, and my parents came in separate vehicles. I got in the car with Carly in my mom's car, and then my dad was in his truck. And then I remember Jay coming out. Well, I think I found out later. We didn't see this because we had already gone, but Jay came out with a baseball bat, to confront my dad and busted the windshield or the back window out of the camper on his truck. Um, and he was arrested. So that made moving out the next day easier because he was not around. And I just, so anyway, but that was the end. And I remember after the kids were because after that, we were going to stay the night at my parents' house, and I'd gone back to the house and got, some clothes and things for us to take over to my parents' house. And uh, that was driving back from the house by myself to my parents' house. I'm not going to say I've ever heard God audibly, but it was very clear to me as I was sobbing on the way over there that the message of it's okay to let go now. Like it's okay. Like
Yeah.
this isn't, yeah. And oh, that was that was the beginning of, well, the
Right.
end of marriage.
End of the marriage.
Not the end of all of the rest of the drama, but yeah.
Because there were multiple incidents, I guess, they're involving you and uh, your parents and sometimes police officers. And
Yes.
so, one of the things that's interesting, police officers and lawyers told her to keep records every time he would send texts or emails or phone calls that were, out of line. Or there was some kind of incident where there was a broken window or something like that to make records. And she has stacks of files with different instances of different issues. And so Jay has been in and out of jail for years. As we're recording this, he is in jail currently. So, and he's been there for some time. What's interesting here is that with all of the difficulties that she has faced with her father, his role became kind of pivotal in this case because he very much became a protector from her now ex-husband as well. And so, is there like a moment? I've got a couple of stories that come into my mind because one of the things to keep in mind here is that because Chuck was a former Vietnam vet and a former police officer, he had experience with firearms and with, physical altercations. He was not unfamiliar with that type of stuff. And Jay had a pretty healthy respect for him. And so he very much became Melissa's protector. Even though originally he was an abuser, he later becomes her protector. Is there any kind of story or anything about him being a protector that kind of stands out to you?
Um, I mean, I just remember, well, so there used to be, it seemed like that things like birthdays and holidays and the things like that would trigger Jay to kind of go off the deep end, and he would start doing, his antics of, breaking into houses, making threatening, phone calls and, trying to scare me. I mean, telling me he's sending the Mexicans after me just, I mean, whatever. But you never knew what was going to set him off or when or what that set off was going to look like. And so multiple times I remember, things would get crazy and my dad would be follow me around town. He wouldn't tell me he was doing it, but I'd see him. He's sitting over here at Hobby Lobby, watching me go to work, or he's sitting over here, um, but keeping an eye on me. One time, things were going crazy. He had showed up at my work, um, and I managed to dodge that bullet. But there was some paperwork from an attorney laying on my desk where I was. Um, Filing an ex parte order for sole custody of the kids, so he would lose his visitation because of the craziness that he was, you know, raining down on us at that point, and and he saw it, and I knew that he would come after us. So I called a friend of mine in Texas. It was like, we got to come visit. And so instead of taking the kids to school that day, I took them to McDonald's and told them we were going to Texas. We went over to my parents' house. My dad wrapped my cell phone in aluminum foil so that it could not be tracked. And I took a burner phone with me. So, but I mean, just different things like that. And um, he was right. I mean, no doubt that he was not afraid to go to prison to protect me
Yeah.
or my kids. So
I remember one night, I think it was like Christmas Eve or something like that. We were at your parents' house, just, I think we were just watching TV, but there was some kind of issue and the doorbell rang and your dad always carried, and especially when things like this were happening, I just remember him standing up off the couch and he had his gun, this little kind of sock holster, and he just threw the sock holster and started walking toward the door. I mean, because we all assumed that it
mhm.
was Jay, and it turned out to be like a UPS or FedEx delivery or something. It was like
Poor
that's a
guy.
bad night to be a delivery driver, right? Um, but things like that as I said, her dad became that protector. And I never knew Chuck as the authoritarian, but he had really mellowed and become the protector by the time Melissa and I had met, and we met in what did you tell me? It was 2012.
Well, we met before, but I think maybe in 2009 or 2010, but we didn't start like dating until 2011, I think.
11? Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds right. Yeah. And we actually met there at martial arts because after her son was doing martial arts for a while, she began doing it. And then probably like a year or so later, I came in and started doing martial arts as well. So she outranks me. But there's, that's how she and I met. And just through that became friends and then eventually started dating as well. All right. So, you shared some about your dad, some about Jay. Talk to people a little bit about Al-Anon.
Okay. So at some point after we had moved back to Fort Smith from Memphis, I mean, like things just kept progressing. And I was just lost. I was still talking to a counselor on the phone that I had started seeing in Memphis.
Mhm.
Of course, that was kind of hard because Jay was always listening at the door, you know. So, um, but anyway, she recommended Al-Anon, and Al-Anon is it's a 12-step program like, AA or NA, but it's for people who are family or friends or love alcoholics or addicts. And because most of us are codependent, and so it's a 12-step program, same 12 steps as the other, just a little bit different application, different circumstances for the people that attend the meetings. But it was very valuable to me for learning how to, like the Serenity Prayer. I'm not going to try to quote it now, but learning which things that I can change and which things I can't, and figuring out how to have peace with that. And I learned through that I'm not responsible for everybody else's happiness, one. And two, one of the things that is out of your control always is somebody else's actions. Because before that, I had always felt somewhat responsible for Jay's actions. And I felt ashamed, even though it wasn't me. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody. I felt very alone, like I was, I didn't know anybody else in my situation. Al Anon, in addition to teaching me the things that I needed to know, also gave me that peace in finding that I was not in it alone, that there were people there that had experienced, you know, as bad and worse, way worse things than I had. And they were also the people who, when one of the times when I was trying to move out of the house, um, when I did not have any contact with my parents, my Al Anon friends were the ones that came and helped me move.
Right. So finding that support with a group, and especially this idea that, you aren't the only one, because I shared some of my story in a previous podcast where I talked about going through depression, and I thought nobody else was going through this either. And one of the most like kind of unburdening experiences I had was to figure out that I was not alone. There are other people who've gone through similar things. And so kind of finding that, those mutual those relationships with people who have had some type of experience like that as well. So really, really important. And especially for today, for my listeners, I would just say, if you think you're going through these things and you're the only one, you're not. Humans have been going through these things for tens of thousands of years. So it's very, very important for you to know, you're not alone in this. And so that's a key aspect there with the Al-Anon story as well. Now, after Melissa had gone through a lot of these different experiences there with both her father and then Jay, and then trying to go through some of that recovery, trying to become whole again, she told me that there was a period there where she had gone from one extreme of a people pleaser to another extreme of kind of like ultra controlled, but then now you feel like you found much more of a balance between those two extremes. And you said one of the things that really kind of gave you focus there too was the fact that you had kids and you said you weren't going to fail as a mother. Like,
Right.
can you?
Um, yeah, so kind of how, well, okay, so when the eating disorders, if we go back to that, those followed me for decades. Okay, so I struggled with anorexia and then bulimia from the time I was, you know, 12 or 13 until I was, I'm going to say 35, right? But so when the shit hit the fan with Jay, I was finally like, no matter how bad things have been or what I have failed at, failing as a mother was absolutely not an option, right? And I decided that I needed to get my shit together, and get healthy. I had been working on the physical, I mean, the mental part of it, with the counseling and the Al-Anon and, you know, reading my Bible and trying to deal with all of those things. But then I also needed to be physically healthy, and eating disorders does not do that, right? So I kind of dove into health and fitness. I did lots of research, tried all the things. Of course, I made lots of errors along the way and trying to figure out what health actually looked like. But, I'd spent so long, just trying to be small. Um, but, what health actually looked like. And I mean, it kind of saved me because um, it showed me that I had the power to change. Like as powerless as I had felt for so long, um, that I really could change my life. And the kids were definitely why I did that. They were my why for sure in the beginning because I did it 100% for them. It didn't really have anything to do with me at all, still, because I still hadn't gotten to that point where I did really anything for me, right?
Yeah.
But I dove into that and just really found that I had the power to change my life, and I did.
Well, and you mentioned fitness there because now fitness is a big part of her life. She is a computer programmer. That's her full-time job, but kind of where she finds meaning and purpose in some of the work that she does is in being a fitness coach and a nutritionist. Um, what would you share about kind of that and how that has impacted your well-being?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, I've been a computer programmer since I graduated from college. I'm not going to say how many years ago. But and it served me well for so long. It's right up my alley. It's, ones and zeros. That's the way my brain works. Whatever. I'm good at it. Pays well, paid the bills. It was always, I had a great job that supported me when I was going through all of this stuff. Allowed me to leave work and do the things that I needed to do and supported me through all of that. So great job. I love it. I still have it. Right. So, um, but I did realize once that, you know, I found a supportive human in you, that provided a space for me to feel safe enough and secure enough that I finally realized that I wanted more out of my work than just a paycheck. That I really wasn't fulfilled with what I was doing. And I remember the day we were home for COVID, so they had sent us home from work. I was, at work. You came into the room to say bye because you were leaving for work. I guess maybe you had gone back then, but I got an email, and for whatever reason, it triggered me, and I was just bawling. I'm like, this is what I want to do. I want to coach people. I want to help people get healthy and teach other people that they have the power to change their lives, whether that's with health and fitness or in other areas of their life. But, health and fitness changed my life, for the better. It taught me that I could change, that part of my life as well as any other part, that I'm a lot stronger than I ever knew that I was or could be. And then that's true for everybody else too. And so that's become my passion. I still do computer programming full time, but I get my cup filled from um, coaching, mostly women now, around my age, going through this phase of life, just because that's, what I'm most familiar with. Um, but helping them, regain their sense of self and their sense of power, and also learning to prioritize themselves at some point, because when we take care of ourselves, we can take care of those that we love even better.
Yeah. kind of just trying to wrap up at this point. This just gets the final question here. What would you say to others, and not just women, although certainly, you
Mhm.
work with women and just kind of your experience, there are a lot of females who've had this, but not just women, but for people who are suffering from the same kind of problems and struggles that you faced, what would you share with them?
I think the most important thing is just that I want people to know that there's hope. No matter how bad things are or what situation you are in, um, you are stronger than you give yourself credit for, A. And B, there's somebody else out there that has faced something similar. You're not alone. And C, if you keep putting one foot in front of the other, you can change your life. You can change your circumstances.
She's talked a lot here just about struggle, and as I said, struggles make you stronger, or at least they can. But what you have to do is what she's talked about here so much is that you kind of have to find that why, and then you have to take those struggles and you have to use them in a certain way because struggles can either build you up and make you stronger, or they can overcome you and they can break you. And it's not just that it's a decision. It's not really that simple. But in a sense, it really is kind of that simple. You have to decide, I am going to succeed in this despite, or maybe even because of the struggles that you face, and they can make you stronger. That's absolutely just a matter of how you use the experiences that you have. They're like any other tool in your pocket. Guys, it's been a little bit difficult for me to sit and go through all of this again with her because I've heard this, but we haven't talked about it in several years. And I know it's been really difficult for her as well because you pull up all these old memories and all the old feelings, and it's just a difficult thing to do. I hope that it helps some of you out there to kind of give you this idea of, yeah, I've been through something similar, or she did it, I can do it, something like that. That's why this podcast, that's why we share these stories. And so a very special thank you to my wife for being willing to sit here and share this story because it is a difficult thing for her to do as well. All right, guys. So as always, if you found this to be valuable, please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.